Hold it! Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
What's up?
Oh, not much, man. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much, Mario. I appreciate it coming on a smaller platform. But, I think you are the best esoteric decoder on the interwebs, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And I want you to introduce yourself, plug yourself, and maybe give a little bit of your background for anyone who doesn't know, but I'm sure most people do, who you are.
Right. Well, thank you for that. That means a lot, honestly. And I was just telling you before we got on air here that I really appreciate your insights a great deal. So I've learned quite a bit from our brief interactions, on the occult rejects and things like that. So the feeling is mutual. I was looking forward to this. But if people aren't familiar with my work, my project is called Symbolic Studies. My website is symbolicstudies.com. And I'm all over the place. So I'm on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and things like that. And what I try and do is create short videos that condense a lot of information into a small package. And right now I'm putting out a lot of content based on astrology. So I put out content around the signs during the sign itself. So right now I'm putting out information on Capricorn. I'll be moving into Aquarius here pretty soon. But I also have long-form content, too, on my Patreon and on my YouTube. I do presentations and things like that. But Symbolic Studies really came out of me just having this desire to learn more about symbolism, and that kind of came out of me being a designer for a number of years. So I'm 40 years old, and I've been a graphic designer since I was like 15 or 16 years old. So it's really been a huge part of my life, and over time, I just really wanted to know more about some of the icons I was designing and kind of what was popular. And I wanted to know more about, color theory and color symbolism. And I've always been a very, very visual person. So, probably starting in maybe 2008 or so, I started buying symbolic dictionaries and reference books. And I've just been acquiring all of these resources, since then. And at some point, I just realized that I should probably start putting stuff out. I felt like I was absorbing more than what I was putting out. And so Symbolic Studies was kind of born from there. And I decided, too, that if I was going to be a symbologist, that I should probably have a good foundation with astrology and the zodiac. So I kind of made it my focus to learn as much as I can about the signs. But, I do have a different take, right? So I don't necessarily talk about natal charts or anything like that. I really get into the symbolic value of each sign, which I get a lot out of. But yeah, that's pretty much Symbolic Studies in a nutshell.
It's honestly one of the most well curated feeds that I have come across on both IG and Twitter, and it looks beautiful. So if any, it's just very, as the kids call it, very kino. And the way you do videos, it's even if you have a more intermediate understanding, I always learn something. So for people who have no introduction or maybe just a slight introduction, it's like an incredible amount of well articulated, but not, it's contained in the video or the post. So yeah, you're great, Mario. And so please keep doing what you've been doing. And I have also really greatly learned, enjoyed our interactions on, and we'll shout those shows out on Occult Rejects. You've been doing an incredible series of the planetary bodies, and I guess we're moving kind of up the tree in a way. So yeah, I've learned a lot. And I think that what I really like about you, and maybe, I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I think we both nerd out on the kind of hyperborean, like the axial, the kind of cross shape, the North Pole symbolism. Like I get very, because it's very tantra, right? And I think that that's something that's interesting to you, is that you like it, and then but I also like it for a different sort of perspective.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, once I came across that line of information, axial symbolism, things related to the North Star, yeah, Hyperborean information, the primordial tradition,
Mhm.
really, in my opinion, the roots of symbolism. It really put a lot of things into perspective for me, and it contextualized a lot of things. I kind of feel like, I'm so passionate about it because I know how much value there is in that line of information, and there's a lot of material out there that you can read that gets into it. And it took me a while to find, those authors and those books and that kind of material. But once I started digging into it, there was just kind of no looking back for me, basically. And so I'm passionate about it too, because there is an inward aspect, with all of that symbolism, the polar dynamic, getting to your sacred center, to your true north, right? Your true authenticity. And so there was definitely an aspect to all of that that really like invigorated me and really filled my cup, symbolically. I feel like a lot of the information I was reading beforehand, a lot of like Western occultists and magicians and things like that, I spent a lot of time reading that kind of material. And I felt like some of it was a bit cryptic, and I felt like there was like always more that I was looking for. And it wasn't until I came across this kind of information that I really start like, I basically felt like I was kind of leveling up, more so than when I was reading, other stuff. But yeah, I'm glad we both have that in common, because it really is a deep well, and I think it's a treasure to find people online who know about it too, because we can always get into great conversations, and there's just a sort of deeper awareness there, I think.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, is that I am limited in my knowledge as well, in the sense that like what you say is often new to me because you present it from a totally different angle. So I gain something and I'm like, oh, okay, like this is the comparative sort of theology or the cosmology or the ontology that we look at. And so I can sort of see the interrelationship and the links, but it only happens when we discourse. That's what I find really interesting. It's not when I'm just listening, but it's actually when we're like in dialogue. So that's kind of magical and cool at the same time.
Definitely, definitely. And this is actually our first time we're having a conversation one on one. Usually it's been in a group setting. So
Mhm.
I'd actually love to know very briefly, if you don't mind, like a bit about your history and kind of where you've come at things from,
Okay, sure.
if you
So
don't
I've
mind
talked.
sharing.
No, absolutely. I've talked a little bit about this on my show. So I really started. Um, uh, Dharmic thinking has been part of my life for probably since like my earliest time. But we were raised Catholic, so I've talked a bit with this about with Nick about how I believe Catholicism is a kind of Illuminist Rosicrucianism. Like, I'm not saying it's like the perfect system or anything like that. I'm just saying that in the iconographic presentation of Catholicism, it's meant to sort of maybe move you into the inner temple. This is kind of my line of thinking anyway. So I kind of, I don't know, I guess I played around. I was always interested in magic. I was always interested in mythology, like the Monkey King. I'm very taken with that
Mm.
story. I think all my dad's very taken with that story. I think it's just like a certain. He's a magician too, right? That's what one thing that he's often not remembered for, maybe in the popular consciousness. But he has 72 spells of transformation and 81 secret powers.
Mm.
So yeah, he's an interesting character for that reason, and so I always liked him. My grandparents are Buddhist, so when I was a little older, I sort of was like, I'm gonna actually return to Dharma, or maybe I never left. Maybe it was
Mm.
always something that I was, because I always said it. Like if you would have asked me when I was like a little child, I would have said yes. Like I would have said, oh yeah, I'm Buddhist. But I think that you just do you just go with what your family is into. So basically, I went to Dharma in my teens. Then I started getting interested in the like left hand path, sinister tradition, especially what the kids used to call sinister Catholicism. So that was like obviously sort of referring back to what I'm saying, sort of like a darkening of what I had known as a child. So I sort of played with that for a while, and then I sort of didn't love the person that I had, maybe the things I had internalized. I'm not saying that magic did that, or that the books did that or anything, but I didn't really. There were things about myself that I felt needed to be rectified.
Mm.
I already had a background in Dharma. It made sense for me to return to those practices because Vajrayana, in many ways, is a path of rectification. This is a very important idea. It's very axial, you could say. It's part of Nagandra, which is like it's the beginning path, but it's also something that people can return to practice intermittently when they
Mm.
feel they need extra purification to become stainless, to become pristine. That's kind of the idea. And then so you perform this Nagandra, this sort of beginning ritual, and then you can move on to other sadhanas. So during the lockdowns, it gave me a very good opportunity to practice hours a day, every day. And then I was also reading Kabbalah. I was like just doing other things. I was trying to sort of get myself into a state where I was going to what I felt was a hardship, like kind of like mentally cope with that time. So that's basically my
Mm.
story. And so then later on, I started to listen to podcasts, and I thought, well, this is such an interesting medium. It's very electric. It's very alchemical. There's something about it where people treat it like some people at least treat it almost as a magical working, as like a great
Mm-hmm.
work, even as
Right.
extension of themselves. The name of my podcast started from a comic book that I wrote in my early 20s that never went anywhere, but I tried to shop it for a number of years. So I thought, well, why don't I take that idea that never went anywhere, and why don't I turn it into like a occult art zine online? So that's basically my origin story. Is that I just thought I can do this, and maybe my conversations will be different because I have a different knowledge set and a different background.
Mm-hmm. I see. Excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I've been curious. When you say things, you brought a number of things to the table for me personally, where my ears just perk up, and it's something that I'm interested in, and I've always just kind of wanted to know a little bit more about, what your angle is and all of that. So I figured this would be a good time to do that. So that all makes sense. That lines up.
I consider myself to try not to be fixed in any dogmatism or ideology. I try
Mm-hmm.
hard, but obviously, the human mind is a complex thing. So, I try and be more flexible and approach things, as I say, in a non-dual way. Am I perfectly non-dual? No. But can I look at things and say, is this like the correct view? Is this the correct action? I think I'm capable. I've like practiced tantra long enough where I
Mm-hmm.
think you can become self-referential enough to be able to sort of recognize in yourself those like the both the positive and the negative behaviors. Or thinking at least. So I try and like when I come to this show or speak to people like you who I would consider like superior to me in their terms of knowledge, in terms of Western occultism. I just try and have like, let's see where the parallels are. Let's see where we can like agree. Let's see where even we can disagree, because there's something
Right.
interesting in that as well, right? And nothing wrong with that.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I frequently listen to people I disagree with, or I don't necessarily understand. Right. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Absolutely. I think that this is honestly like a really interesting moment that's happening in discourse, that people are actually acknowledging the same idea that, yes, actually disagreement has more potentiality in some ways to come to pragmatic solutions. So I'm a big fan of just like you just discourse, it's just words.
Hmm.
And yeah, you see where in the, when the words, when at the time of silence, when the words are done, you can see where everything falls. But until then, hash it out with words.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So one idea that you spoke of pre-recording was talking about the wheel symbolism, and how you have on your Patreon, which I encourage everybody to join, obviously, is about the Wheel of Fortune. So this is obviously a very dharmic idea as well. Maybe not the tarot version, but the dharmic wheel. We also have it's the eight, it's like on a ship. It's like a ship's wheel. That's sort of
Right.
the idea. And so there's the 8 points. There's also other wheels. That's also kind of interesting. But wherever you want to begin, Mario, I mean, I'll add when I can.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm interested to hear your input with this one for sure. So the wheel has been on my mind a lot lately, and there are a number of symbols that I like to fall back on when I need a good metaphor to sort of describe a particular dynamic or what have you. The world tree is something that I've done presentations on, really talked about at length. The wheel is right up there, the egg or seed symbolism as well. But the wheel has really been something that's really come into my awareness. And it is such a helpful symbol to describe so many different things, so many different truths, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And broadly, just with the wheel in general, right? There are many types of wheels. So you have the Wheel of Fortune, right? Just like the 10th card of the Major Arcana. You have the Wheel of Fates, the Wheel of Heaven, the Wheel of Karma, the Wheel of Destiny, the Wheel of Life and Death, the Cosmic Wheel, the Wheel of the Law, the Wheel of Existence, or the Wheel of Becoming. There's so many different types of wheels. And the thing to me, on what I find to be just really, really intriguing, is how it lines up with what we briefly brought up already, axial symbolism, and what axial symbolism, is really all about, and why it's an important sort of thing to understand if you want to really develop your, symbolic awareness of things. Um, and so to me, the thing I think about immediately is just the heavenly wheel, right? The wheel of heaven, and how the stars are spinning above us. And in my personal opinion, the earth is not spinning, the earth is actually stationary, and it's actually the stars and the heavens that are moving, right? I'm not sure if you share that opinion. Do you share that opinion by chance?
So I'm inclined to actually agree with you in in what you're saying now, but I think when we spoke about this before, I didn't disagree, but I think I offered a slightly different perspective, that the
Hmm.
the idea is that the world island does shift. But I'm not fixed in that, system. Like, it can be either or even neither nor. For me, that's okay. Like, I'm not it doesn't offend me or anything. So I will say conceptually that the heavens spin around us and the earth is fixed. That's perfectly okay.
Yeah, I mean the Earth has been likened to a wheel as well, for sure. And the wheel, or the Earth itself, has obviously clearly moves to some degree, just symbolically, metaphorically. And so it's changing, right? And that's the whole entire thing with the wheel, is it relates to cycles and movement and change and things of that sort. So that is actually part of my history that's maybe worth getting into briefly, is part of what really got me interested in the line of axial symbolism, hyperborea, the North Star and the Northern Sky, and its historical and occult and esoteric significance. is me looking into, the cosmography of what we live within, right? I'm basically inclined to think that there really is no accurate map of where we live. The map is not the terrain, right? And so even if you have a map and you are actually at that place, there's just no way to really have a map that completely depicts any terrain at all, right? There's a kind of there's a rift between the two, between what's actual and what is literal, versus what's on a piece of paper or what have you. So the map is not the terrain is kind of like a thing that, for many years, I've kind of been of this mindset essentially, right? And maps for a long time, as you're probably aware, have been used for propaganda purposes, right? And so there's a lot of hoaxing that has happened with maps, right? Different countries have vested interests in making their country maybe seem larger than what it is, right? And so cartography and map making is interesting in that regard. So I'm just of the opinion that, what we actually live within, I tend to think that it's actually I view it more from a symbolic lens, and I tend to think that we live in something that's kind of likened to a field, and versus an actual, I just don't think that we live on a spinning ball personally, hurling through space. I'm not a heliocentrist that way. And so this information I started questioning in like 2014, I would say. Just geocentrism, is that a valid sort of claim? What kind of comes along with that? Heliocentrism, what's that all about? Does that make sense, that the sun is the center of the system? Since I've gone down this rabbit hole, I now claim personally what makes sense to me is that we don't live in a solar system. We actually live in a polar system, that there is a symbolic central spiritual pole, if you will, that seems to be the point of pivot for all the things. And so this pole has been likened to a axial, basically. So it's referred to as the world axis or the axis mundi. And this axis is the axial to the wheel of heaven, essentially, right? And so in the heavens, the North Star is along the lines of where the world axis or axis mundi is, basically. And so all of the fixed stars revolve around a central star. And so this is where this heavenly wheel concept comes around. Sometimes it's been likened to a mill as well, a heavenly mill. There's even a well-known book called Hamlet's Mill, and it's all about this idea of this cosmic wheel that's always turning and turning and turning. It's interesting, too, that for a long time, all of the gods have been compared to chariots, and the gods, Zeus or the sun or Jupiter, rather, Saturn, etc., that they've been depicted on chariots. And obviously a chariot can only move via having wheels, right? And they each have a different draft animal. And so literally the planets themselves and the gods associated with these planets have been compared to either wheels, their cycles have been compared to wheels, or they've been imagined as chariots, right? And of course, again, the chariot only functions because of the wheels. And then the wheel only functions because of the axle, because of this axis, right? And so I'm inclined to think that there are realms above and below, and all of these realms are actually connected to each other. And all of these realms have, can kind of be likened to their own sort of sphere or their own wheel. I think in some ways, sphere and wheel have kind of been used synonymously in a way. And that these realms above and below are connected through their center. They're actually connected through the axial or the axis. It's very similar to our chakra system, right? And so my understanding is chakra, depending on the translation, maybe it's either disc or wheel. And so if we have 7 chakras or 8 chakras, right, they're all connected through that central axis, basically. And, the spine would be this central axis that connects all of these chakras together. And so I think that simple makeup is sort of a micro of the macro, essentially. And that, know thyself and you'll know the universe. When you access your center, your axial, because symbolically, humans, each individual has been likened to their own wheel as well, right? That when you get to your center, you can access other centers. And so I'm inclined to think that the center of self, the center of Earth, and the center of the cosmos actually are threaded together. There's like a golden cord or a golden thread or an axial or axis that kind of connects all of these centers together, essentially, because my opinion as well is that everything emanates from a center and then also returns back to that same center. It's not unlike a torus field. And so when you look at a torus field from a top-down perspective, it kind of even looks a little bit wheel-like, right? And when you get into wheel symbolism, what's been said is that the wheel, really, the primary, most significant part of the wheel is the center. It's the hub of the wheel. It's where the axle is, basically. And so the middle of the wheel is where the reconciliation of opposites occurs. It's the most balanced part of the wheel. And so it's been said that the external part of the wheel, the circumference of the wheel, has been likened to multiplicity, division, things outside of self. I think you can kind of say the lower sort of realms or the lower domains have been likened to the outside of the wheel. And when you travel to the center of the wheel, you get towards the immutable center, the motionless center. And when you get there, you symbolically become what's referred to as the unmoved mover. And so by being stationary and immutable and still, you cause the wheel to turn, essentially. And so I find all of this very, very interesting as it relates to, once again, the center of the wheel of heaven, which would be the North Star. So is this what's, basically been alluded to when people say to follow your true north or to follow your guiding star, right? I think you can make the case that it's to get to the center of your wheel, where all of the spokes of the wheel are unified, basically. And so when you're in the middle of the cross, as an example, where the vertical and the horizontal lines meet, in the middle of that crossroads, you are kind of unifying all aspects of the cross. You're unifying all the quadrants, right? And so you become sort of the middle point or the middle way. To me, this is all very much related to the middle path. And as it relates to the cross, too, because the cross, in and of itself, that's almost like the simplest wheel you can illustrate, is having four spokes, right? A circle with four spokes. So this is the quartered circle. And so that fifth point in the middle is like the fifth element, essentially, right? The quadrants can relate to the four elements, and then the fifth element is right there in the middle. And so I know a lot of ancient kings and lords and emperors, they wanted to rule from the center of their domain, from the center of their region. Even I know China was once referred to as like the Middle Empire, and I know that it relates to some of these concepts and ideas as well. And I know even, too, there are some emperors in the East where their region was literally gridded out, and it was a 3x3 sort of grid, and they occupied the central grid, the central square, rather. And so they're in the middle of this cross, surrounded by all of the other squares of the region. And so this idea of operating from the center and operating from the middle, there's a whole entire as above, so below dynamic with it. It seems to me you get to the center of the wheel, and I'd love your input on this specifically, by being present. And that I think kind of operating on the outside of the wheel, symbolically, it's like being preoccupied maybe with material, physical things, maybe about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week, next year, being kind of anxious. I think a lot of people are really anxious. I do tarot readings for people, and most people are more anxious than they are depressed. And what I've heard is that, if you find yourself constantly thinking about the future, you're going to be prone to anxiety. If you find yourself constantly thinking about the past, you may be prone to depression. But if you find yourself in the present moment, you're going to be prone to peace. And so I think that there's a relationship there with becoming that unmoved mover, being at the still point in the middle of the wheel. And you do that by being present. So those are a few things off the top of my head that I've been thinking about as of late with the Wheel of Fortune. But of course, there's plenty more to chew on and get to.
That was, I mean, that was really impressive, Mario, that you just kind of pulled that. I'll just add a few things. Is that so you basically describe Buddhism. I mean, I know we've spoken a few times before, but that's very good. So yeah, basically that's what it is. Is like you could say that the North Star is like in the past when you and I have spoken, I likened it to white Tara, so Arya Tara, and she sits on a it's called a moon disc is what she sits on, but she sits on like an 11 petaled lotus, and it's a moon disc, but her legs are in Padmasana, so they're in like a lotus position, so they don't move. One leg's not sticking out, that's green Tara or some of the red Taras, but her legs are just fixed. She's fixed in place, and she's pristine. That's why she's white. But it's not white as in it's not racial. It's Diamond Thunder. She's just pristine in her consciousness. So that's exactly like what you said. It's like you're present in the moment. You're present in the fix. You're not fixed in time and space because you're conceptually free. It's like the whole thing, especially in Vajrayana, is to be non-dual. It's a very important idea, like to be able to understand things behind things, like a twilight language behind a normative text like sutras or suttas or all of that. That all has at least 3 layers. Some may say 7, some say 9. Different teachers, different systems say different things. So we try and take it as conceptually as possible when you're at maybe the middle density or the middle marga. So, you try and just be like, yeah, this has a slightly different interpretation. This school has a slightly different way to describe it. But White Tara is so perfect because it is the primordial star. It's like she is the pristine primordial consort when she is pristine. But then she also is self-combusting. This is a really important idea for Tara. Like the multiplicity, like you said, like the star self-combusts, but maybe it doesn't self-combust. Maybe it just appears to. So this is obviously another really important idea in Buddhism, is this idea of existence appearance. And like blue shift and red shift, that's all also existence appearance. Like things don't necessarily have to be red or blue, but because of the way, as you're saying, the heavens shift around us. And I'm also an geocentric, I will say that.
Okay.
I agree with that. I'm not a heliocentric. But
Gotcha.
so I'll add to that. But no, so I think that I think primordially it's like you're sitting there, you're in this. The foundation is built on 3 things. It's built on loving kindness, bodhicitta, emptiness. Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It means luminousness and masslessness. And then those 2 things come together, sort of like a triangle, I guess, and they form the truth, the Dharma, or the way. So that's basically tantra, and like I think easy to conceptualize way. It's like it's not fixed, but at the same time you're not going to extremes. You're not going to you're not over here so far on the left. You're not over here so far on the right. You're synthesizing in the middle. So maybe you're taking of ideas that appear on both pillars, but you're not going to extremes. You're Nagarjunian in your view. So you're looking towards the middle pillar. You're looking. So if you want to say the Kabbalistic tree, you're looking. You're on Yesod and you're looking straight up and you're going right together.
Right.
So
right,
that's obviously one idea, right? Like that's just one idea. But or you're moving along and you're doing like the path of Moses or the dragon or whatever. Different systems call different things. But the lightning strike. So there's ways to move up and move down, and I'm not against like drawing from obviously the properties, colors, meanings of the Sephirah or their manifestations in other systems. But what I'm just saying is that the idea is to always try and come back to the middle. So you might go to one extreme here, but if you do that, it has to be also rectified. And rectification always happens in the center. I know I kind of got off pace, but I think that makes sense though, because
Oh
you're
yeah.
saying it's like it's from our spine upwards, it's connected to the chakras, however many different systems again have
Hmm.
different things. I do agree with you though that wheel is a very good translation of chakra. Um, Also, the axial wheel, like the axial wheel of the heavens, is called the Dharma chakra as well. You will
Mm.
find some statues of Shiva by Rava, particularly by Rava, but also of sometimes of Shiva. This is a broader discussion. We don't have to get into that. But he will have a wheel on the back of his head. Now, at the same period, you also find Buddhist iconography with Avalokitesvara, so that's also a title of Shiva. Now, are they interrelated? Probably interrelated conceptually, but they're not, they have different kind of genealogies, we'll say. Like one is the Buddhist idea and one is the Hindu idea. But
Mm-hmm.
he also will have a wheel on the back of his head because it's interesting because the first Buddha, Gautama Buddha, he isn't even the first in and of himself. That's also interesting. But the first one that we know of, the first one in our sort of multiverse, he was is considered to be the first wheel turner.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the sutras. So in the sutras, then you have a second wheel turning. When the Buddha comes down from heaven and he
Mm.
gives people the sutras, that is considered the second turning. And then Tantra, or and all of that, basically Buddhist magic and some other kinds of, we'll say Himalayan magic. Gets contained in this religion, and that is the third turning when Guru Rinpoche went to Tibet. That's how we think of it. So I think it's really interesting. I'm sorry, I want to hear what you have to say and just like add or
Oh no, that's beautiful. No, I love it. Yeah, so there's a few things we can kind of pull at from here regarding heliocentrism. So with heliocentrism, obviously, the claim is that the sun is at the center of this system, and as I mentioned, I like to say that we live in a polar system, not necessarily a solar system. And my understanding is that there has been a great shift symbolically. This is one of the threads I've been pulling at for years now, and I get a lot out of it. Is that there is a great shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. So I'm inclined to think that we do live in a very solarized world. A lot of that is very anecdotal, but one of the things that kind of struck me over the years is how many symbolic reference books make reference to the sun. They say that everything is the sun. And so the wheel is a sun, which I can see that claim too, obviously. And there is a relationship there, right? The rays of the sun being like the spokes of a wheel, right? And so a lot of these books, though, a lot of the newer books say that the swastika, as an example, is a solar symbol. And the quartered circle is a solar symbol. All these things, and that never sat well with me, to be honest with you. And so it wasn't until I found more competent authors and older books did I see that the solar references actually were more minimal. That not everything was solely attributed to the sun. And so the first time I ever heard of polar versus solar symbolism was from this guy named John O'Neill. And he wrote a couple of books called The Night of the Gods, The Night of the Gods, Volume 1 and Volume 2. They came out in the late 1800s, and he has a whole entire chapter. I was really fortunate. I have a friend who is a book collector and dealer, and she knows about my interest with all these things. And she went to some old, dusty bookstore, and she saw an original copy of this book from the 1800s. And she looked through the book, and she was like, "Oh my God, I should pick this up." And she sent me photos immediately, and she said, "You have to read this." And so she let me borrow the original copy. I read through it, and he has a chapter called Polar versus Solar Symbolism. And essentially, he makes the claim that there were a lot of deities in the primordial world that were associated with this axis or this axial, with the world axis. And they were known as, or at least maybe nowadays, they would be known as polar deities, polar gods. And he said that a lot of them over time became solarized. And so he uses the example I remember of the Egyptian god Ptah, and he kind of looks like the Oscar statue. And so he's standing upright and vertical. He's bald, and he's holding this staff. The staff, or the wand, I would say by extension to the phallus, the tree, the obelisk, the tower, all these things retain an axial sort of component with it. And he says that Ptah was actually a world axis polar deity, but over time, people who started studying Egyptology, they started attributing the sun to this god. He was saying that that is not the original correspondence. And so this was very fascinating to me. And over time, what I learned is that there have been more than one sky clock, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so in today's world, the sky clock most people follow would be the path of the sun, which would be the ecliptic. And so whether you believe or follow a 12 or 13 sign system, that's up to you. But, you know, people are paying attention to the path of the sun. And this is part of the solarized world that we live within. They're also clearly following the 7 wandering stars, which would be the planets, right? And my understanding is that obviously there's a time where lunar symbolism and a lunar sky clock, I think, was kind of in favor more than any other. And there's some cultures that still follow the lunar calendar, right? Mm-hmm. And so this may have been a transitional period. I'm not sure. But it appears to me, based on my research, that the original sky clock was actually more polar. And it was Ursa Major and Minor going around the polestar. And so people were more concerned about that than anything else. And so in the primordial polar hyperborean age, people were more so paying attention to these northern constellations. And Draco's right up there too. And there's a lot of interesting symbolism with Draco being in the northern sky, circumambulating, going around the polestar. And so this became like a huge focus for me for a long time. And I think it's really interesting too, that when I started getting into what I would say personally, like the depths of sort of black magic and Western occultism and things like that, I was kind of surprised to see how many authors actually made reference to Ursa Major and the North and Northern symbolism, which is another way of referring to all of this stuff. And so, so these constellations, the Northern constellations, Ursa Major and Minor, they've been likened to chariots. They've been likened to plows as well. They've been likened to many things, right? So Ursa Major, Minor, the Great Bear and the Little Bear. Most people today know them as the Dippers, the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper. They've been referred to as reindeer and sailors and all sorts of things. There's so many correspondences. In ancient Egypt, it was the thigh of the bull. Thigh symbolism actually is this really intriguing rabbit hole that relates to axial symbolism as well. We kind of talked about that the last time we streamed together. But it's really interesting. It, to me, makes sense that primordial man would be fixated on the center of the heavens. And it would make sense, too, that there would be chariot, wheel, wagon symbolism attributed to Ursa Major and Minor. Because it's the innermost part of the night sky if you use the North Star as the central star. And so their movement alone basically is almost a metaphor for the rest of the Wheel of Heaven, essentially, right? And so I just wanted to mention that this big shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism, and even, I think maybe I've mentioned this before on a live stream that we've been on together, but there's an author named John Major Jenkins, and he basically puts forward in his book, Galactic Alignment, and he's a heliocentrist. He's not a geocentrist or a Hyperborean-minded person. But basically what he says is that, according to his research, that in ancient China, that they were more so fixated and focused on the northern sky as well. They had 8 constellations in the northern sky, 1 constellation per trigram, which I think is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And he said over time, when they became more solar, they basically transferred those 8 constellations to the path of the sun and then introduced 4 more constellations, giving them 12 constellations, like the modern zodiac, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a number of examples of symbolic transference from the northern sky to the path of the sun, or elsewhere, in the heavens. And so I see it that this portion of the night sky is so potent with myths and folklore and everything else, that this was sort of the primary area in the heavens, and that over time a lot of these myths and storylines shifted to other parts of the sky, right? And so I bring all of this up as well because when we're thinking about hierarchy, as in like a spiritual hierarchy, I usually, back in the day, I just used to think of a hierarchy almost like a pyramid, right? And so it's like, okay, you have the base of the pyramid, you have the most stones or bricks, and then as you go up the pyramid, obviously there's fewer and fewer with every single level that you ascend the pyramid. And it's really not unlike a mountain, right? So pyramids, essentially, in my opinion, every pyramid is almost a metaphor or alluding to the polar mountain, the central polar mountain, right? Mount Meru or what have you. It goes by many, many names.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's what the pyramid represents. And so as you ascend the pyramid or ascend the mountain, you're getting to the apex of that structure. And that would be considered to be the top of the hierarchy, right? And so this is where obviously the capstone, you have the eye of providence or the all-seeing eye. It's really, though, no different than when you get to the center of the wheel. And so essentially you can almost imagine a pyramid. Now imagine basically a wheel and just put that pyramid, along the lines of spokes that emanate from the center of that wheel. Going to the center of the wheel is going to the top of the hierarchy. The sacred center is the top of the hierarchy. And so that's what the northern sky used to represent. It's almost like the apex of a pyramid, essentially. So I'm assuming that makes sense, right?
I mean, that's a mandala. That's tantra. That's like that's the mind palace. Like, that's where Guru Rinpoche lives. He lives in the copper-colored mountain with his 108 takinis. I mean, this is it. It's like this is exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it is exactly that. It's like you climb the mountain and you see. It can be described in different ways depending on your text, but I like to think of it as like maybe we'll say like a crimson maiden, and she is burning, but she's not really burning because it's pristine wisdom fire. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. I'm sure you are, but if you're not, like, recall it, I'll send you a picture after record and you can tell me what you think. But there's a image of a goddess called Chinnamastika, and she has a severed head. So you're probably wondering why I'm bringing this up, because it's interesting, because in her tantra, she's described as severing her head in that kind of Uranian motion, and it expands, the explosion, the pralaya, the diamond thunder, it explodes outward like a wheel. But that she doesn't really die, because what happens? In just a few moments later, she puts her head back on. So it's kind of, it is like a kind of, well, we would think of it as consciousness, right? It would be like a moment in consciousness of understanding what that means, understanding like the primordial syllable, like the word of God, or the secret name, or whatever you want to call it, the primary bija of creation. And what that is that has to be in perception. So you have to be a witness, you could say, to the act. But the witness can also, well, there's a secret thing, and the secret thing is she wears a mirrored crown, a adamantine crown, a vajra crown. So it's a mirror. So that also means that moment in time can be of yourself, like that can be of you. So you have to understand like all those layers at that one moment, and in that kind of like pristine consciousness, you kind of recognize whatever people want to call that state. So that's basically what it is what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's exactly that. So I agree with you. I think it's really interesting. I love that you brought up the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. We had a great actually discourse, you and I, on this subject on the show, but I think I'll just bring it up a little bit because I think it's interesting. So Ursa Minor in Chinese is Maritzi. So a very axial, pivotal, extremely important Buddhist Iranian goddess. But she also has something really interesting about her, is that her name can also be the female equivalent to Mithras. So Mitzah in the
Ah.
Avestan and Maritzi, it's the same, but it's a little
Hmm.
different. And she also rides a what? A corpse cart. That's really interesting because you
Ooh.
were talking about chariots. And what does she have leading her corpse cart? 7 boar piglets.
Ooh, I love it.
So, and she holds an acacia branch in her, I believe it's her right hand, if I'm remembering correctly. Yes. So in her right hand. So that is also very interesting. And she also holds what in her left hand? She holds a giant, or not a giant, it's like an oversized sewing needle with a golden thread. That golden thread is the thread of karma and dharma. So she's the primary, you could say that that is like the law that she brings along, or the truth, and then that's what the golden thread is, or the connections to all things. And then okay, so for Ursa Major, I think you and I were like kind of like I was shocked at how similar it was, but I referenced like a wolf face goddess, and she is kind of like the Barbelo queen, but she can also be depicted as a lion face as well. Like she has
Mm.
multiple
Ooh.
different presentations, but in Buddhism, she has a wolf's face for a very specific reason. I won't get into that, but it's very interesting. And so she's considered like the grandmother, but the sort of, we'll call her the daughter, the Marci. She kind of flies through the heavens in a figure eight pattern between the sun and the moon, because the sun and the moon are on the left and right hands, and it can change. This is a big thing in Tantra. Sometimes you'll see Tankas with it, the sun and the moon on different sides of the Tanka. That's totally fine because the text might describe it in that way. So you have to just follow with whatever the text is saying.
I see.
So, yeah, so it's very dependent. It's called dependence on view, because can you get to the right orientation? That's a big thing, right? Like
Yeah,
it's all
exactly.
about your perception, all about like how you're seeing the wheel turn. Where is it turning? Is it a conceptual idea? Is it actually on top of the pyramid? So I mean, I didn't mean to go on, but I think it's really interesting for people who didn't listen to the Rejects episode to hear it again, because I just, it's like such a interesting thing for people who are interested in Buddhism, but also like the perspective that you bring, which is fresh for me.
Right on. No, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you're bringing all of this up. You're right. Orientation has a huge part to play in all of this. There's a reason why the North Star was the preeminent star for sailors for a long time. There's a reason why a compass always points north. I'm inclined to think that there is a physical aspect to the compass that obviously matters and is interesting and all of that, but there's also a metaphysical aspect to the compass. I think it's a spiritual tool as well, is what I'm trying to say. The
Mm-hmm.
compass is a physical and metaphysical tool, and so what I would say too regarding the corpse cart, that is really intriguing. I've heard, and this is, I'm pretty sure from some of the Middle Eastern books that I've read regarding world axis symbolism, and there's a whole thing in esoteric Islam where people acknowledge the world axis, and the world axis for them, in many ways, is Mecca. It is the Kaaba cube.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
operates as
Mm-hmm.
their
Mm-hmm.
spiritual central pole, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard the this world axis be referred to as a necro pole as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because there's a lot of symbolism connected to the underworld and the afterlife and the northern sky. And so I've read it so many times now at this point. But the idea that there is a true stairway to heaven, some people have made that claim. It's embedded in all sorts of different myths that the stairway to heaven, or this ladder to the heavens, not unlike Jacob's ladder, is essentially the world axis. That this axis has been likened to a bridge between worlds, essentially. And also, I know Ursa Major has been referred to as the coffin of Osiris as well. And so there is a lot of death afterlife symbolism, connected to the northern sky. The 7 boar piglets is super fascinating to me. So
I
one of
thought you
my
might like
favorite authors,
that.
yeah, it's great. It's so perfect. One of my favorite authors right now, Rene Guenon, he talks about the fact that hyperborea has boar in there. And he says that that is not a coincidence and
Mhm.
it's not a mistake. That basically it appears as though in the Eastern world, Ursa Major and Minor had a lot of boar symbolism connected to it. Specifically, if my understanding is correct, black boars, which makes a lot of sense too. And that over time, as this information found its way further west, that boar kind of got translated to bear. And so he has a whole entire article called The Boar and the Bear, or something along these lines, where he discusses all of this. And so this is why now Ursa Major and Minor have been likened to bears, right? And I actually have a tarot card for the Wheel of Fortune. And this is from a deck called the El Gran Tarot Esoterico. And it is a Spanish esoteric tarot deck. There's a whole entire thing where, for whatever reason, I have my hunches historically, but there is like a specific Spanish line of tarot symbolism that is a bit of a variant from your traditional standard tarot deck, basically. But in this card, it's so interesting. In this version of the Wheel of Fortune, you see a tree, and this tree at the very bottom of this, at the base of the tree, there is a millstone, which is circular. So once again, the mill being likened to the mill of heaven or something along these lines, the wheel of heaven. And there is a polar bear that is holding the branch of a tree and also holding onto the millstone as well. And I'm like, that is so interesting and brilliant. A polar bear. You know, it's really interesting that we attach polar to bear, and I don't think any other animal in the north. And so Ursa Major and Minor, they're circumpolar constellations. They're circumambulating. They go counterclockwise around the polestar, right? And so they are symbolically polar bears. In fact, even I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Grateful Dead and sort of Grateful Dead artwork and things like that. But one of the things that the Grateful Dead that they've branded is the dancing bear, right? And so a lot of times it'll be like a line of dancing bears, these colorful bears, and they've been part of their like album art and like merchandising and stuff like that for a long time. And so when I think of the dancing bears of the Grateful Dead, you know, we're talking about corpse car and necropoles and afterlife and the underworld. It just makes me wonder if they actually are aware of some of this symbolism, because it's almost like two bears dancing around the pole star, essentially. And so one of my other understandings too is that you can imagine Ursa Major as a mother bear, and then you can imagine Ursa Minor as the cub, basically. And one of the ancient sort of ideas that some indigenous peoples had was that it's almost like the mother bear and her cub, you know, basically in a cave, essentially. And this is another thing too, the sky, the night sky, you know, as you imagine it, maybe like a firmament type situation, being a cave. And one of the metaphors for this opening to the afterlife or the underworld has been likened to like a door in the cave, or some sort of opening or vault at the top of the cave, something along these lines, kind of like the exit out of the cave. That's a classic metaphor that kind of relates to some of what we're talking about today.
The bear symbolism. Okay, this is okay. We'll start with the black boar. So the black boar is actually really significant in Tantra, and just maybe like we'll say Vedantic Indian religion in general, because it refers to what's called a Kistrapala, or a field protector. That's what those two words mean together. Sanskrit's very alchemical like that. You can put together different words that don't seem like they should go together and actually create a brand new word. And that happens a lot. That's part of what makes Tantra kind of complicated. But so that's a really important idea, is protector, a sort of genus loci who lives in the earth and protects a specific region. Maybe it's like a specific valley or specific forest or whatever, or mountain. That's very common. So that's obviously one idea. So those are usually male deities. But what is interesting is the sort of prime boar-headed deity is called Varahi. So it's a mother. So it's a matrika associated with the Pleiades. But there's also a form of Vishnu who takes many avatars, many forms in the world, because he lives and dies. He's a kind of a rising and dying god at the same time. He has a form called Varaha, who holds the world. And if you look at iconography of him, he holds the world between his tusks because his head is a boar. So that's one idea. And so her idea, the mother, is that she falls all the way down to the lowest world. And only through the animal head of a boar, because the boar is the animal that overcomes ignorance. So she puts on the boar's head, and the idea behind ignorance is that you're supposed to liberate light from matter. So if she has to climb up through all these layers of matter and make it to what we would call the carnal ground or the garden, interesting, that on the other side, then, because it's really, we think of it as both. So when she emerges, she's fertile because she's a mother, but also because she's liberated light, but light is also sound. So there's like these interplaying ideas of light and sound, and what that is, sort of what she does is she sort of purifies herself by coming up through the layers. So that's also boar. And then I'll be short with this one. The bear stuff, really interesting. The primordial consort, Ekajati, she often rides a bear. It's very uncommon to see bears in Indian Tantra, but you actually start seeing it in Tibetan Tantra, where they have much bigger and they're more prominent. The bears are much more prominent. So in India, it's very uncommon, but they use an interesting word for bear in Sanskrit, which is called raksha. Now, that can also refer to a rakshasa, which is a kind of worldly demon. So something really, like, as I said, Sanskrit's a very precise language. It's usually things are not named unless there's a kind of cosmological reason for why things are interrelated by name.
Right. I see. Oh, that's great, man. I'm loving all of this. Seriously.
Okay, good. I'm glad you are. I am too.
No, it's fantastic. I did a presentation called the Pleiadians, and I get into the symbolism of the Pleiades, and obviously, in today's world, there's lots of different groups that have lots of different things to say about the Pleiades. It's a fascinating constellation, or asterism. You really, it's beautiful too when you actually like look at it. One of the interesting things, though, is that it looks very similar to a dipper. It looks very similar to like Ursa Major or Ursa Minor, and obviously the number 7 is attached to the Pleiades, and it's often referred to as the Seven Sisters. And so what I put forward in my presentation is that in actuality, my personal opinion is this is a very good example, one of the best examples of symbolic transference, and that Ursa Major was viewed as the original 7 stars of enlightenment. There's a lot of sages that are said to come from the north, from the northern sky. The Apkalu is one such example. The Rishis are another example from India. And that these 7 sages come from that constellation, and there's actual like diagrams and illustrations that link each rishi with each star of Ursa Major. Ursa Major in and of itself is kind of its own metaphysical system, basically. But to me, what I think makes a lot of sense, and I'm not the only one who's put this forward, so I'm relying on authors who have obviously come before me and done a lot of great work and stuff. That basically Ursa Major was the original 7 stars of enlightenment. And when people became more solar and more solar oriented, the symbolism of Ursa Major, a lot of it got transferred over to the Pleiades. And so you'll notice that Ursa Major does have a connection once again to this stairway to the afterlife, stairway to heaven. People say a very similar thing about the Pleiades. The Pleiades, people say that ETs, the Pleiadians, right, come from that star system, and they're more advanced and they're more ancient and things like that. People have said the same thing about Ursa Major. The fact that they look very similar, I think, is really, really intriguing. And so I think there's a...
Maybe.
What was that?
A mirror, perhaps.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes, for sure. And so what I've heard is that basically this axis, this original axis, this symbolic world axis, that a new axis almost needed to be created when people started focusing on the path of the sun, and that the Pleiades basically operates as almost like Ursa Major in a way, and that the axis actually runs from Taurus to Scorpio, and Taurus has a brilliant royal star, Aldebaran, and Antares would be the royal star in Scorpio, and that this new axis kind of became the world axis symbolically in this new solar system. And the Pleiades kind of represents like an Ursa Major sort of thing. So it was kind of a convenient shift from taking mythology and symbolism from Ursa Major, putting it onto the Pleiades. And here's a kicker, in my opinion: the father of the seven sisters is Atlas. And Atlas today, when you view Atlas like a statue or a painting of Atlas, he holds a globe on his shoulders, right? So he's holding up the world. But in ancient, older, maybe not ancient, but older illustrations of Atlas, he actually is holding up the sky itself. He's holding up the heavens. And so he is basically operating kind of as a world axis sort of symbol. And so basically one of the things that's associated with the world axis is there's an old idea, and there's illustrations that really kind of like present this in a way that's like easier for your mind to sort of grasp. I'm thinking of Ovid's Metamorphoses. Like one of the first plates is called the Chaos or Chaos. And you see all of the elements kind of in this amalgamation, and everything is sort of mixed together. And you see parts of the zodiac broken and in different parts of the canvas, different parts of the illustration. It's very chaotic. It's called chaos, right? This goes back to this idea that heaven and earth were once fused together, and all of the elements were fused together, and it's almost like this heap of just stuff, right? There was no actual space for things to kind of interact and to be created. It wasn't until the world axis came to be, symbolically, God or a godlike figure separating heaven and earth, was there actually space. So the world axis symbolically operates as like the central pillar in the house of God. And I actually think that the Magician card, the first card in the Major Arcana, that is what he is symbolically representing. He has a wand in one hand. He's pointing it to the heavens. He has his other hand. He's pointing it down to the ground, as above, so below. He's basically saying, I separate heaven and earth. But by doing so, he also binds heaven and earth together as well. And the Hebrew letter that associates with that card is Beth or Bet, which means house, kind of on a grander sort of level, the house of God. And so he is basically saying, I am the central pillar in the house of God. And in actuality, we all are that central pillar, that there is a relationship between heaven, earth, and man, and that we have been likened to a this triune relationship, and that we basically separate heaven and earth, but we also bind heaven and earth together, because symbolically, man himself relates to the pole as well. And this actually relates to an idea too, that these spokes of a wheel, that we are kind of like the spokes of the wheel as well, in that we are what separates but also connects the innermost sanctum, which would be the top of the hierarchy, that central hub, with the circumference of the wheel as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about the Pleiades and some of that other business.
That was so great. I'm very interested in the Pleiades, thinking of this as well. But so we make room for both. We keep both. So both are separate, but they're interrelated. So we have the Ashtamatrikas, we have the Saptamatrikas, the 7 and the 8 grouping from the Pleiades. But then we also have the idea of the North Star. So and Ursa Major. So I agree with you that there was likely some kind of transference or even conflation that happened. But then I also think that even from like, okay, so a modern Buddhist, like say in Nepal, who they have the most knowledge in terms of their outer and inner religion. Usually Nepalis have the most preserved tradition. They will understand like what I'm saying. Like okay, so they'll see the matrikas, the 7 goddesses of the Pleiades, sometimes 8. They use 8 in Nepal and 7 in India. But they'll see her, especially Chamunda, so the primordial grandmother. She's a husk. She's sunken. She's like has 8 arms. Ferocious, menstruating usually, and So they'll understand that it's from the matrikas. They'll be able to tell you, okay, matrikas. But then they'll see like white Tara, and they'll say, okay, that this is the North Star. So they'll understand that there's like a difference. Sometimes I think that we often say in Buddhism that there's a difference without distinction. So there's a way to like map their consciousness in sort of a dialectical way, but you're not actually leaving them to be fixed at consciousness. So when you see her as Chamunda, that's her on the world. That's her coming down, and like you're saying, there's a relationship between that kind of the godlike or the hero figure. In the Puranas, it's the son of Shiva. His name is Skanda. That's also a name in Buddhism. That's also a name in Theosophy, this Skanda Kumara. And so that she's raising him. That's one idea. And so he is kind of like that solar figure, but also interestingly, you brought up the idea of space. Well, in like Tantra, Vishnu is space. Shiva is time and sometimes mind, but Vishnu is really space. And as I said, Vishnu can both live and he can die. But Vishnu undergoes a kind of an interesting transformation in Tantra, especially Tantric Buddhism, where he becomes Rahu Ketu. He becomes the dragon of space. So through his movement through the play or through the turning of the wheel, can we also, like very snakes and ladders, we can also move through the turnings of the wheel, depending on how flexible, like a dragon, your system is. That's sort of the idea. So but he also represents something else. He also represents something you brought up before about the planetary bodies or the grahas. The grahas are also graspers. So you could also say that they are of him, but they are not fully archonic in our cosmology. They're not really archonic. It's sort of like our karmas, and then we can choose to play them out. We can like choose to sort of reorient ourselves to the center pillar. And then we're not so moved by them. We kind of have more control when we kind of, like know your will. That's kind of what it is. It's like, are you like at the center? Are you at the single pointed, pristine consciousness? Then you're able to sort of maneuver them. And then there's also, obviously, there are magical ways to remedy each planet if it's really severe. So,
I think I cut out for a second. The last thing I heard was know your will. That was the last thing I heard.
Well, I just think that that's also like a kind of modern, updated way to say something similar, maybe not exactly the same thing. Just like if you come into the center point, come into single pointedness, pristine consciousness, like you're not so moved by the planets. And so you're more able to maneuver around the karmas that they present in this life. That's kind of sort of the idea. So like you were saying,
I love that perspective. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think that it's going to bring more stability to your life having that perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. One of the things I just wanted to mention too, regarding the Pleiades and Ursa Major and the Seven Sisters and everything else, I'm inclined to think that we actually literally get the shape of the number 7 from Ursa Major. I'm not sure if you've ever considered that, but there's actually an Egyptian tool called the adze tool, and my understanding is that this was a woodworking tool, and it basically looks exactly like a number 7. And this tool was used in substitution for the thigh of the bull for certain rituals. And the thigh of the bull, you will see reliefs and paintings where a thigh is being presented to a deity or a pharaoh or something, and sometimes the thigh is getting close to touching the mouth of a deity, and that this is related to the opening of the mouth ritual, which I'm inclined to think is really just like a transcendental sort of journey to other realms, right, via the world axis. But sometimes this adze tool, which looks like the number 7, is used as a substitute for the thigh of the bull, which is basically a reference to Ursa Major. So this tool is Ursa Major, and it looks like the 7. And when I came across that, I'm like, well, is that where we get literally the icon or glyph for the number 7 itself from? So I'm kind of inclined to think that that's the case, because when you look at a swastika as well, I'm inclined to think that that's Ursa Major going around the polestar 4 times a year, one per season. And depending on the orientation or how you present the swastika, each little branch looks like a number 7 as well.
So there, I'll make a connection here because I think it's really interesting what you said. Is that so in Sanskrit the character for number 7, sapta, it looks like a 6, but it also could be thought of as a thigh bone. And there's also actually an
Ah,
iconographic way to look at this is from Durga. So if you see Durga as Mahish Ashura, so the mother who slays the buffalo demon, she is stabbing the buffalo demon in his thigh.
oh, excellent.
So it's very interesting. And so, but then there's also something else interesting. The Ashta, the 8. So if you look in Sanskrit, it actually looks like a goad or a hook.
Ah,
So, there is a turning element to both of those things. It's like the wheel that turns or the swirl you see versus
yes.
the thing that turns it.
Yes, exactly. And I've heard that, if I'm not mistaken, there is sort of a relationship with sapta, sopt, and actually sept or set, as in like septenary, which means 7, right? And so I think that that's kind of an interesting sort of connection. And the deity Set, the Egyptian deity Set, was very much connected to Ursa Major as well. In fact, depending on sort of your take, it's been said that Set hides behind Ursa Major, and that his mother is actually at the forefront. And depending on your perspective too, that could be Typhon. And actually, the Typhonian tradition. I'm not sure if you've ever gone down this rabbit hole, but the magical Typhonian tradition. Very much related to like the Dark Mother, not the Greek Typhon, by the way, but this Dark Mother sort of aspect. There's so much northern symbolism connected to Typhon, Ursa Major, Set, septenary symbolism, the number 7, things like that. But I've heard that that's related. Sapta, Sopt, Sept, Set.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. So she's very ferocious, like the Ekajati or Chamunder figure. She's extremely ferocious. But she also has the element of taming the dragon. But
Yes.
it happens different. We slightly, I guess, change perspectives, as you've been saying, which is such a good way to frame that. We kind of shift perspective to a different part of the Leela or the play. So by the time that she tames the dragon, meaning excuse me, bringing him into the play as a figure who is underneath her feet. That's often how it's portrayed. I guess the idea is that she is more in control of who he is than
Mm.
he is. Like he's not free moving in the world. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It is fully under her will. At least in the point in tantric Hinduism. Now in Buddhism, it's a little different, but he is subordinated to the grandmother, to the Barbelo.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
so he's like a subsidiary, but he's still important for a specific school in Buddhism, but he's not overarchingly important. They tend to focus on forms of the Mahavijjas. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this grouping of 10. It's a tantric grouping, and so uh, the new schools, the Sarma schools, they tend to focus on Mahakali or Matangi. That's their preference. But the ancient schools, the older schools like Nyingma and Bonpo, they focus more on this primordial Barbelo. So that's more their preference. So everybody has their kind of preference. But also, I wanted to say something about the magician card because I thought this was so interesting. So obviously, I said the Buddha can be the Chakravartin. There are different kinds of Buddhas in different ages, aeons. But also the idea of Mahakala. So if you look at the iconography of the Time Kings in Tantric Buddhism, specifically Buddhism, not Hinduism, he holds a spoke, and that's even how it's described in this text. It's like he'll hold a spoke or a stick, a danda, that is part of the wheel of time. He has to put it in for you, or it's conceptual because time is also in your mind, of which he also is. So it's a conceptual understanding, but that is how it's considered. So if you meet him on the carnal ground, the idea is that he will put into place the spoke and then turn the wheel of time, which is of course consciousness, perception, all of that.
Wow. Wow. I love that. That's so great. Um, something I mean, we could talk forever, honestly.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah,
No,
totally.
no,
We
this is
could.
amazing. I absolutely love it, but I'm just even in my mind, I'm writing down notes and I'm like, okay, so which topic actually is more relevant? But this taming of the dragon idea,
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but in Christian iconography, it's not uncommon to see the Virgin Mary actually taming the dragon. Sometimes she
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
holding Christ, and sometimes it's not uncommon for her to be holding Christ and having have one foot on like a serpent, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so again, I think of Draco in the Northern Sky for various reasons. But it's really interesting. One of the classic sort of motifs with her taming the dragon is that she is oftentimes um, spearing the dragon with a very,
Mhm.
very long lance or a long spear. Sometimes that spear has a cross at the end of it, right? But it's more elongated than a traditional like Latin cross or something like that. And so I've often wondered if they're trying to deliberately encode the axis, right, the world
Mhm.
axis,
Mhm. Mhm.
with that. And so there's authors like Rene Guenon, which I talk about all the time, but he is very clear in his position and stance that the sword, the spear, the lance, the wand or staff, all world axis symbols essentially. And when you look at different cards and different works of art through that lens, there is something to be said about that. So I think that in and of itself, is pretty interesting. And taming the dragon too. I mean, there's so many myths that relate to
Mhm.
this.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I'm even thinking of like, Saint George. This is another
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
Saint George tames the dragon or kills the dragon for this village, and he does so. And most of the illustrations, if I'm not mistaken, he has a very, very long lance, like an exaggerated lance, right?
Mhm.
That he's
Mhm.
using to tame this dragon. And so the world axis has also been likened to stability, righteousness. Again, it's this immutable, sort of timeless kind of presence. So, whether you want to attach a masculine or a feminine or a neutral sort of thing on that, it all kind of makes sense, right? But it basically is not unlike a point of pivot for the people, so it gives you something to revolve around axis, and they refer to it as such in some of the resources that I have, that the plumb line, which you use to see if a wall is completely vertical or not, right? If it's slanted or not. The plumb line, right? So basically, a line with a weight at the end of it. That is a known world axis symbol, and it's used to see if a wall is just or not. And even in the Bible, there's the plumb line of God, and basically they compare Israel to a crooked wall, and that the wall is crooked and is not just and not completely vertical, right? And so there's a lot of beautiful things about the world axis and how it's encoded, and how it kind of means, something that is actually like kind of true or level or something along these lines too.
I mean, that's incredible. Obviously, Dharma means it can, one translation is the truth. So, of course, I
Ah,
find that very interesting. And I mean, yeah, there's absolutely so many rabbit holes you and I can, like, I think we could, like, honestly speak for hours.
for
But
sure.
I won't keep you for hours. I will let you go in a few minutes. But I think this has been an incredible conversation, by the way. And I love Guinan, so I don't mind if you want to talk about him. I could talk about him all the time, so it's just all good for me. And
Nice.
one thing that I thought was interesting, well, everything you said was interesting, but I thought just the idea of I always think of it as very alchemical. Like sometimes we move into a solar age, maybe that's just perceptual, or maybe that is like a replacement. But in some ways it doesn't matter because if we just retain, if you want to call it the perennial system or sort of like a secret knowledge or whatever you want to call it, a nighttime ritual, very lunar, like as long as you retain both pieces, then it doesn't really matter that the axe is still there,
Exactly.
the wheel turns, it's all good. We come together in synthesis and dialogue, and discussions just like this. So that's kind of my position, is that like, yeah, I'm okay with a solar calendar. I just think we should use both. I just think we should have like a unified calendar, because I know in, like the goddess that I mentioned, she's very important to Chinese diaspora. So it's actually really interesting, but she's not common in Tibet. So there seems to be like a difference of preference, because they have a different dakini they have many dakinis in Tibet, but they have there's different ones that are more popular. But I just think it's interesting how we kind of have different views, different preferences, different orientations of seeing the same story, maybe even from the same cultural perspective. But then we kind of, we disperse, we go into the multiplicity, we go into the realm of ideas, and then we have to, find our way back, I guess.
Right. No, I share basically the same opinion. Is that the world axis and all of the symbolism and whatever, it's still there. If anything, it's a little lost, right? And so you have to do some digging. But I think there's a beauty in that too, and it makes a lot of sense as well, because even with the North Star as an example, there's a deeply feminine aspect to the North Star as well, and there is a masculine, godlike aspect as well. It's been said that the throne of God exists in the northern sky, right? And so there's a lot to be said about both sides, and even a neutral sort of perspective with that. But it's more passive in nature, right? And so there is absolutely like a receptive sort of dynamic with this as well, I would say. And so kind of like in today's world, the passiveness of anything is going to be kind of more hidden and less so sort of revered or acknowledged. And I think it's because we do live in this solarized world where, especially in the Western world, this is one of the ways I've heard it put, is that in the West, what's prioritized is action, traditionally, and then in the East, what's been prioritized has been contemplation, right? And that these two things oftentimes are at odds with each other. And so being contemplative, is more passive, right? Being action oriented and just doing the thing. And, if you just look at our media and things like that and what people tend to gravitate towards, right? It's like the classic sort of thing with movies with action and explosions and all that kind of stuff. What is passive is oftentimes just going to get overlooked and underappreciated and things like that. But to me, it's cool just to bring some of this stuff to to people who are interested in this material. And I've gotten a lot of emails and messages, and people have booked study sessions and readings and stuff like that, where there are people where like this is coming online for them in a pretty big, significant sort of way, and they're adding to the conversation and everything else. So it kind of makes me wonder, at least in my own little micro sort of sphere, if there is just a shift back to some of this symbolism, polar symbolism and everything else. So I'm not sure. I just know that it resonates with me. So I'm going to continue researching it and diving into it. And conversations like this really light me up, dude. So thanks again for the invite. This was awesome.
No, I'm so happy to have done this. You'll be my 40th episode. I think that's super appropriate. And I think there's something interesting that I can end on, which is the ideas of the gunas, the tamasic, the sattvic, and the rajasic. So rajasic is red, it's action oriented. Sattvic can be monastic in quality or ascetic in quality. And tamasic can mean sinful, but it can actually also mean passive. But there's an idea that all of these have natures of which to climb the tree, at least in the Hindu or Tantric Hindu conception, is that you can utilize all three of these paths or yanas or maybe margas to climb higher. But in Buddhism, we kind of understand them we kind of understand them a little differently, but we kind of want to become quality less. So it's kind of like the spontaneous naturalness, no preconception, sort of like post-conceptual, and being just like kind of liberated in the world as we are every moment. So I don't know, but I think that is kind of interesting, a different way to look at it maybe, but not opposition, just a slightly different view.
I love it, man. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And so Mario, please just plug yourself for anyone listening, and I'll make sure to include everything in the show notes.
Beautiful. Yeah, people can find me at symbolicstudies.com, and that really is sort of just the easiest place to find all of my links. I would say if you're going to follow me anywhere, Instagram is one of my hubs. I would say a lot of people have said that they, follow my Instagram account, and that'll keep you up to date with everything and all of that. But yeah, I'd love it if anyone out there is interested in a tarot reading. They're more than welcome to reach out, or a study session, or if they need a good book recommendation or anything along those lines. Essentially, if I can help anyone with their symbolic journey, that's kind of what I'm here for.
Well, I think you've been an incredible presence, and I honestly I hope you're obviously welcome on the show anytime. But in the future, I hope that expansive, high honors and growth. So
Many thanks.
I think, and you're welcome. So I think that's appropriate for court date Thursday. And thank you, Mario, so much. Appreciate it, and have a great weekend. And yeah, this was amazing. Really, really great.
Thanks, man. You too. Yeah, the feeling's mutual.
Okay, awesome. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.